Intellectual Takeout hosted an article entitled "Sexual Desire is Immoral Because It's Inherently Objectifying." The article was written by Raja Halwani, and while it was originally published on another site, Aeon, I believe, I'm sure I'll link it in the description, I discovered it through Intellectual Takeout, which posted it on December 12th, 2016. Most of the opinion in this article comes from an 18th century philosopher, Immanuel Kant, who I had never heard of until reading this article, so I have to take this philosophical view through the lens of Raja at this point. So that's what I'll focus on, at least initially. The basic moral stance seems to be that sexual desire is inherently objectifying because you are focusing on what they are rather than whom they are. That's what I think he's trying to express, but honestly I'm not sure because he comes very close to dismantling his own arguments. He starts by making the claim that treating people like objects can mean and evolve into many things, including beating and violating them and all manner of terrible things, which, fair point. The worst of people is a thing that exists, and there are psychological factors that contribute to that. I guess, but I suppose it's as good a point to start as any when attempting to point out a societal ill. But then he mentions facts that blur this line he'll develop further in the article. He states that objectification can and does exist in consensual sexual relationships, and this is an unacceptable and demeaning behavior. He explains that sex does not need sexual objectification to happen, but then he doesn't really define or provide nuance for this point, or really anything that explains as to why he's mentioning it right now. But he does bring it up later, so I guess I will just leave that fact unattended for now as well. If you're a little confused, don't worry, so was I. We're just gonna move on though. What I will focus on next is a point his own writing brought up. I would guess it so he could effectively shatter this possible defense, but well, I'm just gonna read this next part verbatim. Alright, here we go. But don't we use each other all the time? Many of us have jobs as cleaners, gardeners, teachers, singers. Does the beneficiary of the service objectify the service provider, and does the service provider objectify the recipient by taking their money? These relationships don't seem to provoke the same moral qualms. Either they do not involve objectification, or the objectification is somehow neutered. Yeah, that's a fair point, I think. How would you explain this discrepancy? So, Helwani continued with, Kant said that these scenarios weren't really a problem. He draws a distinction between mere use, the basis of objectification, and more than mere use. While we might employ people to do jobs and accept payment for our work, we don't treat the person on the other side of the transaction as a mere tool. We still recognize that person's fundamental humanity. Well, I guess that blew my argument out of the water. See, there's a distinction now. Apparently people are never used as a mere tool in any situation. Except sex, probably. And so he continues with, sex, though, is different. When I hire somebody to sing, according to Kant, my desire is for his or her talent, for the voice and action. But when I sexually desire someone, I desire his or her body, not the person's services or talents or intellectual capabilities, although any of these could enhance the desire. It's an interesting thing to point out right there. That doesn't really help your case. But he continues with, so when we desire the person's body, we often focus during sex on its individual parts. The buttocks, the penis, the clitoris, the thighs, the lips. What we desire to do with these parts differs, of course. Some like to touch them with the hand, others with the lips, others with the tongue. For others still, the desire is just to look. Holy shit. Alright, so we know this dude knows some shit about sex. It's very obvious. And thanks for explaining sex with the insight of a 5-year-old. But to continue on, he states, this does not mean that I would settle for a human corpse. Oh, that escalated. Our desire for human bodies is directed at them as living, much like my desire for a cell phone is directed at a functioning one. What a fucking metaphor. His view on how you and I perceive and engage in sex is certainly illuminating, though. At least he qualifies how fucked up he potentially is by insisting the body at least have a pulse. That's cool. At least we can take solace in the fact that he's not into an unattached hunk of vagina or something. And it's exactly moments like these that make me wish I could do artist renditions. Because that would be beautiful and thought-provoking. But talent's hard. This distinction he's drawn, though, it's a flimsy fallacy that this idiocy hinges on in its entirety. I mean, what the fuck is he even talking about here? We don't treat the person on the other side of a transaction as a mere tool. That never happens. All this sounds like projection or personal bias. And honestly, probably not even honest projection. People are used in professional settings all the time. It's so pervasive, I'm surprised I have to mention it. Many companies make you wear a uniform and act a certain way because you're used to the company is not your personality or what makes you a person or anything like that. It's your ability to make a burger or to tell a customer where the waffles are located. And most of these companies don't view your contribution as talent. Upper management in many circumstances is actively researching how to make these jobs easier to perform so they don't have to train you as much. And so you're responsible for fucking less shit up. Companies don't care about you any more than they legally need to. Which, admittedly, is significantly higher than any time in history as far as I'm aware of. And that's not even accounting for the amount of sexual objectification that happens in advertisements. Certain establishments and pretty much anywhere in a free society. This is not a distinction I can readily recognize. But he continues to say that when you hire someone, it's for their talents. And I'm not sure if the implication here is that looks and beauty are not something that someone can be talented in or improve, or if the implication is that nobody ever hires anybody for looks or for reasons other than skill and ability. This is almost adorably naive. But this distinction he's drawn, it doesn't exist. I'm not sure if this is pandering or projection, but to me this is a person of poor experience on the subject of sex, and I'll go more in depth about that. But what's more concerning to me is the seeming dissonance with reality. He basically argues that just because it's a thought process with the potential for abuse, it shouldn't be entertained at all. And if you look at the situation from, I don't know, say a fucking logistical standpoint, you would probably understand that, fuck, this is an impossible task. How would you go about doing this? Well, fuck. I guess you could work this problem out through drawing an arbitrary distinction around a part of society that bothers you, then blaming all of the issues on this particular part of society. It's actually quite genius, because if it works, you get rid of something that personally bothers you, and you get to feel like you made the world a better place. So fucking kudos, man. And I figured this now is a good time to point out that at the time of writing this, I haven't looked into Immanuel Kant or the author at all. So take the uninformed jokes and bullshit assertions as they are. They're just jokes. I wanted to judge this writing on its own merit. And considering I'm concerned with how this information is presented, and not necessarily the information itself, Kant's actual philosophy is less relevant than Halwani's interpretation at this point. As far as I can tell, it's an exceptionally close-minded interpretation. And he states the capacity to reason is what makes people ends in themselves, worth of moral respect. And there's nothing in this statement that I can particularly disagree with, but once again, all he's doing is boiling all the nuance out of the circumstance. I spoke of dissonance with reality, and what I'm referring to is the idea that you are somehow not your body. To clarify, I don't mean that you aren't more than just your body, but that you are a separate entity from your body entirely. I mean, if my body is in shape, why can't I take pride in that and receive validation from others' approval, even if their reasons are self-interested? I mean, are you implying one shouldn't be proud of their accomplishments, or again, are you implying that it isn't possible to increase your physical attraction or to work on your appearance? But honestly though, I have trouble even being curious anymore as to the possible implications. Because this whole thing rings a projection for me. I do not relate to what he's saying at all. Women, and fuck, maybe men too, but I've never really noticed. But women for sure, look better to me the more I like them, or the more capable I find them, or the more I respect them. They look less attractive to me if I dislike them or disagree with them on fundamental issues. Their bodies are just the easiest representation to appreciate in a physical way. Lust-filled objectification is not necessarily dehumanizing. It's simply applying value to something other than personality or spirit. From my own personal experience, I can say it can leave you with a more meaningful and fulfilling connection. And that's not to say that you should base your relationships around physical attraction. And it's not the most important factor. But it definitely contributes. And suggesting it shouldn't is absolutely ludicrous to me. I mean, it's simply ridiculous. And honestly, this whole thing smells of a prude that boils things down to an unrealistic black and white, probably because he's terrified you might think the same things he does, which is almost as terrifying as the last point he makes. Remember when I mentioned that sex doesn't need objectification to ensue, as though that wasn't obvious, and then just kind of meandered away from the point without addressing it too much? Well, we're at the end of the article, and the point drop-off is finally paying off. We're going verbatim again, just to give you some context here. Is it possible to have sex without objectification? Of course. Prostitutes do it all the time. So do many long-term couples. They have sex with people whom they do not desire, and with no desire, there is no objectification. Not even love can fix it. When the desire is high, when the sexual attraction is in full swing, my beloved is a piece of flesh. Though love does lead to occasional cuddling, which is nice. Huh. That is nice. I'm kind of hoping at this point that I've made an error, that I'm reading into this wrong, or that I've misrepresented something in my own mind and instinctively didn't question it, just built up off that fallacy. But this is kind of terrifying. What I've gotten from this paragraph is that the only sex you should be having is with people you don't want to be having sex with. Fuck, what? This is the only responsible and mature way to engage in sexual activities. Like what? Through the sheets hand jobs and going through the motions because if you don't get their rocks off occasionally, they turn into a cunt? I mean, fucking what? I've had sex with no sexual desire attached, but I'm not positive this guy has, because it was honestly morally bankrupting. I felt used, not enjoying it. I felt like it was an obligation I had to perform despite issues I had that were irrelevant to her body or our sex life, but were then transferred to these because I did my relational duty. Or what the fuck ever, why ever I did what I did. But the joy was sucked from the activity, and I was left feeling like my body was more important than my feelings. Yeah, somehow having sex that is only fun to your partner kills your feeling of worth. It's an issue that still affects how I perceive and interact with relationships, and it doesn't stay fun. And this attitude toward sex in relationships is infantile, and this advice is potentially life-ruining. Not to imply that my life was ruined by that, but this advice would not have saved that relationship, which did fail pretty hard. To me, this speaks of a fundamental misunderstanding of what love is, because sexual attraction or objectification or whatever, it improves the experience. That visceral attraction, that instinctual aggression that directs your thought processes to focus entirely on each other's pleasure and your own and the moment at hand, it allows you to connect with another person that is both, one, is going to feel better than any other interaction you are likely to have in any other circumstances, and it is deeply comforting, especially when you truly care about that person. It's connecting on more levels, not only one you deem to be superficial and irrelevant. And granted, this has nothing to do with sex where you don't particularly care about the other person at all. But if that specific issue is your problem, then you are attacking this the wrong way entirely. And all of this also speaks heavily of thought policing. Who are you, and who is this philosopher? Fuck. I might leave that one in. This philosopher that is so uniquely qualified to tell me that I'm immoral and personally responsible for destroying the fabric of society. And this next line is interesting. And with no desire, there is no objectification. Not even love can fix it. So this point here seems to be that love cannot, on its own, enable sexual desire. Cool. I don't even really know what to make of this point. I think it's supposed to be profound. But just because you don't explain the connection and make simple sentences that could be interpreted multiple ways doesn't mean you're on a higher plane of understanding. But fuck, what do I know? Maybe he's just an idiot, or fuck, maybe I am. And let's look at this final thought here quick. When the desire is high, when sexual act is in full swing, my beloved is a piece of flesh. But they were always a piece of flesh. The point you're highlighting here, the point that's being highlighted, is that the people are more than their flesh. And yes, that's true. It's 100% true, and it's noble. You should view people as more than meets the eye. But to imply that you should ignore their flesh if it excites you is just... Fuck, dude. It seems like you might be the one with trouble processing your emotions and your attraction and all that shit. But... and the last lines of the article read as follows. I agree with Kant that sexual desire and objectification are inseparable, and a force that morality must reckon with. Sex is like any good dessert, delicious, but with a price. Fucking profound, dude. But real talk, I mean, I guess it's possible that sexual desire and objectification are inseparable. I haven't necessarily seen any proof that that's not true, and I haven't really ever considered it. But again, you're explicitly telling people that their sexual drive is immoral, that a fundamental part of humanity is immoral. Has there ever been a recorded incident in history where teaching people that their natural urges are evil and to be repressed actually panning out successfully for the repressed? I mean... I'm actually kind of asking if any of you know of a situation where that happened. I'd be interested to learn about that. But preferably it's an example that's verified by a faction that didn't have a provable agenda involving the perpetuation of that knowledge. I mean, find me something that somebody that didn't give a shit said was true. And I'm going to look into Kant's theories to see if they were seriously misrepresented, or to see if they were misunderstood, or to see anything like that. And just because now I'm slightly curious. I'm also going to look into this author and see what his possible motivations are. I didn't really want to infect my initial analysis with his possible motivations or my stereotypes onto who he was. So, yeah, but I will look into that. So leave a comment if you feel so inclined. I would really appreciate some differing opinions and maybe something I didn't notice that will change my mind. As this is my first video, I have no idea what the reaction will be and if any of you would be interested in hearing from me again. But if there's a mild pull of interest, I'll make a follow-up correcting anything and pointing out any of the misrepresentations and all the things that I learned looking into the theories. And remember, before believing me, you don't know me or my motivations, and there's always a possibility I'm delusional and insane, because by definition I probably wouldn't know.